So much, Leonid, for being here today. We know it's not a decision that you've taken lightly given recent events. And of course, we're very sorry for your loss. I think that's basically everything from me. So I'll just hand straight over to you, and thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. It's been indeed a very terrible week, the worst one in my life. And of course, I was thinking of rescheduling, but I didn't, because actually it's been always my great pleasure and I think an important mission to talk to students, to the universities, to people who study Russia, who want to better understand it. When me and Alexei, when we discussed the presidential program with which he was running for president, tried to run for president 6 years ago in 2018, we've put education in the first place, like investments in human capital and education and enlightenment, making people more aware about like what's going on in the modern world. He really believed that this could change the world. One note, like one disclaimer before we start. I've received and declined a little bit more than 200 interview requests in the last 4 days, including from like CNN, ABC, MSNBC, like whatever, BBC and France and whatever. And so does every member of our team now, because we don't do interviews at this moment of time. That's a period of grief and remembrance, and we are working hard, of course, to define our future strategy. And we are not yet able to provide like any commentaries on what's next and where we'll be moving. So I kindly ask not to use any of my quotes of what I'll be talking about here as like my commentary to the evolving events. We are not yet ready. We are not doing interviews. We are not doing press. But I wanted to talk to you about the topic of my talk, like what is Russia in 2024, and why 2024 should be actually quite a tough year for Vladimir Putin, and why there is hope for change, even despite the fact that 5 days ago he killed Alexei Navalny, one of my best friends. I'll try to speak as if it didn't happen. Of course, we will return to this in the course of our discussion. It's impossible to ignore that huge tragedy. But I wanted actually to address more like some fundamental factors about the change in the Russian society and about how the Russian society is actually like getting enough of Putin, like getting fed up with him. I would point out to two very fundamental factors that promise to make 2024 a bad year for Vladimir Putin. One, that this is an election year. Why? We already know the outcome of this election. On March 17th, or like early in the morning on March 18th, 2024, Alla Pamfilova, the head of Central Electoral Commission, will announce that Vladimir Putin convincingly won, that he got somewhere around 82 or 83% of votes, and the turnout was something around 78% or so. This is the target numbers that the presidential administration is giving to their local authorities, to the governors, to the regional election commissions, And in this year, the local authorities have in their possession all necessary tools to achieve the desired results. They don't have any reason not to achieve them. They have electronic voting, which allows them actually to produce any given result, and electronic voting will be in place in more than in almost 30, in 29 regions of Russia. They did remove all potentially dangerous candidates from the ballot, so there is no one who even pretends he is actually running a campaign in this entirely mock election. There will be no independent election observers. Like in the past, we used to consider Russia politically as three areas. Like the dark area, with the regions like Kemerovo or Krasnodar or Chechnya or Mordovia or Dagestan, where there is no connection at all between what's on the ballots and what's in the ballot boxes. The regions that are ready to report like 99% turnout and 99% votes for Putin or for his party, United Russia. Then there were white regions, clean regions in terms of elections. Moscow, Yekaterinburg, Novosibirsk, Irkutsk, Tomsk, Yaroslavl, Siberia, northern Russia, northwest. Those are regions where there was a lot of correlation between what is in the ballots and what's in the ballot boxes. Normally, the vote count was done properly and with a decent amount of independent election observers on the polling stations. We were able to prevent ballot stuffing and like all the typical things about elections rigging. In these regions, our candidates were running for offices very successfully, were winning campaign. Myself, I was elected to the city council of Yekaterinburg, Russia's fourth largest city, as an independent, running against the member of Putin's party, United Russia, in 2009. Evgeny Roizman, one of the few independent politicians who are against the war and still remain in Russia, was elected mayor of Yekaterinburg in 2013. Navalny was running for mayor of Moscow in 2013 and received 30%, almost 30% of the popular vote. Our colleagues were able to run successful campaigns in those like electorally clean regions up to the very recent years. In 2020, Sergei Boyko and Ksenia Fadeeva were elected city councillors in respectively Novosibirsk and Tomsk, in two large Siberian cities, while their official affiliation and their only job and their only official affiliation was the head of Navalny office in respectively Novosibirsk and Tomsk. So these elections were held in districts, so not on party lists, in constituencies. And like imagine like Boyko or Fadeeva's constituency, just very regular part of a regular Russian big city with like high rises and rundown roads. And there is a guy who has like a enemy of the people tag on him. Like he's member of Navalny organization, and the federal television is explaining that Navalny is the like enemy of the people for the last 10 years without any interruption. And still, like Sergei Boyko runs the campaign. Voters turn out to polling places, to polling stations. They see on the ballot that there is Ivan Ivanov from United Russia, supported by United Russia, and whose affiliation is, I don't know, like the regional like vice mayor or like, I don't know, head of some regional NGO, and there is Sergei Boyko, who is supported only by the Navalny, and he wins. Not that he gets like 10 or 20% of the votes, he just outright wins a majority. So it was possible 3 years ago, before the war, of course. Now Sergei Boyko is in exile, and Ksenia Fadeyeva, who didn't want to leave her constituencies, serves a 8 years prison term for just being a member of our organization and for running for office as a mayor, as a member of an extremist organization, as they call it. And then there were gray zones, electorally gray zones, the regions where there was a correlation between what's on people's mind and what's in the official outcome. The regions where there was a lot of ballot stuffing and all the possible dirty techniques, but they didn't just like write the official results protocols, they didn't just make them up. They tried to work with the existing results, kind of like to tweak them in a way they liked. So that was the explanation why the Russian opposition was running successfully in regional elections on many occasions, but was not really able to achieve something on federal level, because even if we recollect the Duma elections of 2011, they just had like a box with 10 or 12 million votes that they can just like squeeze from this like electoral black holes and add to the official results. That happened in 2011 when Putin's party United Russia failed to win majority if we calculate the actual results, but then achieved this majority with the help of the votes from those electorally poor regions. Well, now by 2024, after gradual decay of Russian electoral system, the whole country is an electoral black hole. They've added this digital voting, the electronic voting. They introduced it exactly in Moscow, Novosibirsk, Yekaterinburg, Irkutsk, etc. Exactly in those regions where normally ballots were counted properly. So they didn't introduce electronic voting in like Dagestan or in Kemerovo because they don't care. They know that Dagestan and Kemerovo will be able to produce desirable results anyway. So the situation is completely under their control, and we can easily predict the official outcome of the so-called election, as we were able to predict it in any Eastern European country between 1948 and 1989. No one wanted, it didn't make any sense to draw a conclusion from the official results of the election to the, I don't know, Polish or Hungarian or Soviet parliament in 1975. These results were known in advance, like 99% for the Communist Party, and that's it. So Russia in 2024 is very close to this situation anyway. So then why I am saying that the fact that 2024 is a year of election is a stress for the system. The thing is, because it always was, because it's not a bug, it's a feature, as we say in IT industry. It's because the Russian political system is designed this way. We can recall huge elections of last years. 1996, Boris Yeltsin almost dead with 5 heart attacks is running for re-election, and it's of course the most terrible time of his life. He's forced to run because otherwise the communists will win and will try to rebuild the Soviet Union. Yeltsin is very, very, very ill, but he pretends to be meeting voters and doing something. And then the election passes, and it feels like he could exhale. It feels like the darkest moment is left behind. Now he can relax a little bit. But actually, what starts immediately after Yeltsin was re-elected is the largest political turmoil in the history of that period, with 5 prime ministers changing within a year and a half, and huge internal conflict, which actually leads to the appointment of Vladimir Putin as Yeltsin's successor. 2012, Putin gets re-elected 3 months after the Bolotnaya Square protests, after the hugest wave of protests caused by the huge electoral fraud in 2011 Duma elections. So Putin cries during the post-election rally with his supporters, and it's a sincere emotion because he really had a feeling he was on the edge, with massive protests all around the country and so on, and now he wins. He cries, he's happy, everything is done. And actually, the most problematic period only starts. By the end of 2012, the opposition was successfully building the coordination council. The protest rallies are not gone. In 2013, Navalny runs for mayor of Moscow, galvanizing Russia's political life and nearly forcing a runoff, creating a huge political movement under his lead. And by the end of 2013, for the first time ever, Putin's approval rating is under 50%. It never happened before, and it was a very clear trend that started just after the 2012 election. Then Putin was lucky. He was doing bad. People were hating him. People were making jokes. The economy was doing very bad. But there was a lucky chance for him. The Maidan revolution in Ukraine yielded him a chance to pretend he's the one who rebuilds the glory of the Soviet Union, annexing Crimea bloodlessly, as he advertised it, and enjoying an enormous growth in his support and his approval. But if this wouldn't happen, if not this Crimea opportunity, which was actually quite a random thing, Putin was doing very bad politically in fall 2013, and opposition was strong and supported, and the opposition rallies were getting larger and larger. Then 2018, finally, Putin didn't let Navalny run, didn't let Navalny participate in this election. It was quite a challenging task for them to make sure that Navalny is not allowed to be on the ballot, despite the fact that he's apparently built a huge horizontal, grassroots supports with election headquarters all over the country, with hundreds of thousands of young volunteers supporting him. But, well, they introduced a few fake liberal candidates who served as Navalny's placeholders in those elections. And at the end of the day, they were able to play the 2018 presidential election according to their playbook. Well, the largest protest happened just 4 months or 5 months thereafter. The largest protest in Russia in in this period of time were held in September 2018 in the connection with the retirement age reform. So why it is happening? So why is the pattern? Russian elite cares about elections because it's an important glue that keeps them together, because they want to stay the elite. They want to be like collectively re-elected. They want to be reconfirmed. Like Putin's system is a typical mafia state. There is Putin, there are like 20 or 30 key lieutenants who hate each other, who fight against each other, and that's why they need Putin. Putin is the supreme arbiter for their conflicts. So if there is a conflict between two members of Putin's elite, the only way to resolve it is not through an election, not through free media, not an independent court, because fair elections, free media, and independent courts do not exist, but it is in Putin's office. Like, how does it work? Like, a simple model is like this. So there is Putin's lieutenant responsible for gas, and there is a Putin's lieutenant responsible for construction, and there is Putin's lieutenant responsible for drugs and for gambling and for oil and for human trafficking, like prostitution, and for healthcare. They consider all the like areas of human activities as spheres of interests where that yield the privilege to steal a lot of money. When there is a guy responsible for stealing money from the healthcare industry, from the healthcare sphere of human activity, the guy who's responsible for all the procurement, for like buying and importing huge like Siemens MRI machines, and just like with a mandate to steal like 35% of all the budgets. So now they all have children, they all want to have more, they want to be more successful than their competitors. They will never stop, of course, like stealing money from their areas of influence. And so it leads to conflicts. Imagine they want to build a new gas pipeline. Well, who will be awarded the privilege to steal money from this monstrous project? And a huge project is always a huge privilege. Like, you know, when the Nord Stream still existed, 1 meter of Nord Stream of the pipe cost was approximately 3 times larger on its Russian side than on its German side. Like, there goes the pipeline under the Baltic Sea from like Russia to Germany, and for some reason, those kilometers of this very pipeline are 300% more expensive than those kilometers. But who will be awarded with this project? The construction guy or the gas guy? They both think it's theirs because it's constructing something which is about gas. They argue, and Putin decides. Putin summons them to his office and says, okay, like, for this or this reason, you get this. That's yours. You can do it. The guy who lost this dispute is, of course, disappointed. But he knows that he's part of the system, that next time he will probably win, next time he will probably award it. And as a whole, as a system, they are getting more and more successful, more and more prosperous. Right? That their collective strategy is to play by these rules, not to try to resolve their conflicts through the like courts or media campaigns, but to resolve their conflicts in Putin's office, because Putin is kind of like very efficient and was always very efficient in building this this balance, in maintaining this balance of interests. If he was rewarded this time, he will make sure that the other guy will be rewarded next time, so that they all feel parts of like one large mafia, which they are. That's why before the election, and we've seen it many times, their very collective strategy is to reinstate themselves as the elite for the next 6 years. Who knows what happens next, though? Like in 6 years, Putin will be 78. Who knows what will be the geopolitical situation, what will happen with the war, what will be in Ukraine with sanctions, if he will be healthy enough, if he'll be willing to run. We don't know. Now we have to re-elect him to stay parts of this elite circle for the next 6 years. And then we have to steal as much as possible, because maybe those 6 years are our latest opportunity. So this glue will vanish immediately after the election, but their conflicts will become even stronger. The competition will increase. And that's what happened in the past. Like oligarchs helped to re-elect Yeltsin in 1996. They hated each other, but they wanted not to allow communists to run the country. They wanted they wanted Russia to remain like a free market economy. So they all worked together, like Berezovsky and Khodorkovsky and Kuczynski, these guys who really hated and disgusted each other, worked together to get Yeltsin re-elected. But immediately after the election, this very weird union was dissolved, and they started to fight against each other stronger, going to Yeltsin's office and saying, okay, I help you with this. What will I get? What will I get? What will I get? And every of this group tried to install their prime minister or like their minister of finance, and the system became entirely unstable. The same happened in 2012. The same happened in 2018. This retirement age reform had only one objective. The idea of the retirement age reform, like plus 5 years for retirement age for men and plus 8 years for women, was to spare about 250 billion rubles a year, like from the retirement insurance system, and to give it to Putin's friends who helped him to be re-elected. So, of course, it led to massive protests, and they even had to kind of like play it down a little bit and to amend this retirement age reform. But the basic trigger for it, the basic motive for this reform was just to squeeze more money from the economy, to have enough money in Putin's pockets to reward members of his elite who helped him to be re-elected. This will happen again. They all know, and they discuss it almost exactly in these terms in Kremlin. Like that's not time to talk about it now. Let's talk after the election. It's not time to discuss this huge new project. Let's discuss it after the election. Because now everything that can be considered as a non-unity within this system would also be considered a non-loyalty. And non-loyalty is, of course, punished immediately. But after the election, it will be legitimate for guys around Putin to start fighting against each other. According to like Russian language custom, I always say he and his, and like Putin's friend, he is doing something, which is of course not how we say it in English now, but which is actually correct, because it's also enormously masculine world. Like every of these persons whom we are talking about are men of approximately the same age, like Putin's old friends from the KGB, from his dacha neighbors, from his university, etc. So it's just like a very small elitist club of about 20 or 25 men around 65 or 70 years old. With the Soviet mentality, of course, with the KGB mentality, and yeah, they've just rebuilt it for them. Well, there is a wonderful book, Putin's People by Catherine Belton, which you probably have read or heard about, which explains it to a lot of detail. So, expectation number one, there will be a lot of conflict between those people around Putin right after the election because they want to be rewarded, and many of them would consider the upcoming 6 years as their last chance to enrich themselves and to give something to their children. The second, and this is a structural problem. This problem originates in like how communism is designed. The second thing is that the Ukrainian counteroffensive failed in 2023. And Putin was very, very pessimistic about it. He was very frightened. And like it looked like his military advisors reported to him that like the West has given Ukraine like all the necessary tanks and munition and so on, and 2023 would be very tough. And of course, there were also some of his advisors, like first of all, Defense Minister Shoigu and Gerasimov, head of the headquarters of the military headquarters, who were telling him, don't worry, everything is going according to the plan. It was not going according to the plan, but as it's 2024 and we are now in a situation very similar to the World War First, when it was much easier to defend, to hold the defense and to advance. Russian army has been able to hold their positions during the counteroffensive. And Prigozhin, and Shoigu and Gerasimov used 2023 to get rid of all their competitors, of all their rivals. They killed Prigozhin, but not only Prigozhin. They've arrested Stelkov. They've removed few dozens of generals who were raising concerns about the situation of the Russian army and the quality and quantity of munitions and about the necessity of the new wave of mobilization and so on. There were a lot of decent voices in the army and around the army in the so-called patriotic telegram channels, Z channels, in 2022 and later in early 2023. All those voices were entirely silenced by fall 2023. As we are talking today, early morning today, a guy whose name was Andrei Morozov, nickname was Murs, took his life, killed himself somewhere close to Donetsk, and he was probably the remaining prominent anti-Putin pro-war blogger of that ultra-patriotic, quasi-ultra-patriotic group of bloggers who were saying that, of course, the war against Ukraine is a good thing, but Putin is handling it not properly. We need a total war. We need a huge wave of conscription. We need a very different approach. We really want to go all in, and that's the only way to win. So there were people who were like criticizing Putin from the right, so to say. They don't exist anymore. They all were silenced. And so Putin is politically back in the situation where he was 2 years ago, exactly. So pre-invasion. Because what led to invasion? Putin is an evil guy, but a rational guy. His decisions are rational. But the rationality is a thing that depends on the system of coordinates. I mean, I was among those people who predicted that there will be no war, like in November 2021 or in December 2021, because it was clear for me that, like, in the world that I observed, Ukrainian army is quite strong and can't be crushed. There will be enormous casualties. There will be enormous consequences for the economy. Sanctions will follow, like strong response from the West and strong military support from the West. So there is no way how Putin could run like a brilliant blitzkrieg, like a brilliant military operation, like which would be similar to the annexation of Crimea 10 years ago. It was quite obvious that war of aggression against Ukraine will fail, will not succeed like in few days, and then like both Ukraine and Russia will be like covered with enormous bloodshed, which politically like doesn't make any sense. Where I was wrong, and not only myself, many other people, we assume that these are obvious things, and Putin is rational, is acting rationally, so he will keep this in mind. But those things obvious for us were not obvious for him. He was living in a different world. He doesn't use internet. He doesn't use modern media. He is fed by his security service, the almighty FSB, with the red briefing folders, which he receives daily and which he considers to be the only and ultimate source of the actual truth, unavailable to other people. We once were able to read one of those red folders. It's crap. It's like 15 pages about Ukrainian Nazis eating children alive, and 15 pages about how the Ukrainians would welcome Russian liberators rebuilding the Russian world. It was before. That was his expectations. Now, one important data point is that his approval rating really boosted after the annexation of Crimea, then slowly went down and down and down and down and down. And in fall 2021, it went under 50% for the second time in the history. The first time was November 2013, and the second time was November 2021. But he already knew that there is a medicine for such a situation, a magic pill which would solve all the problems, and it was the small victorious war. And in his folders, what he read in his folders made him absolutely sure that this is gonna be yet another small victorious war, just like the annexation of Crimea was. And so the decision he made was entirely rational. A criminal decision to invade a neighboring country, but a rational. Then he faced the reality. just like a few days ago at the Munich Security Conference, I once talked to one of the high-ranking officials of one European country, and I've criticized them for maintaining a line with Putin, for talking to him. And what he told me in response was, well, our prime minister talks to Putin because we feel it's the only way Putin gets a little bit of information from the real world. Because he isn't getting any other information from the real world. Like 2022 was a shock. The situations that like Putin's army was not able to achieve its goals, and so he didn't achieve any boost in his approval rating and didn't solve his political objectives inside Russia. That was all a shock. Putin didn't know what to do and what to say. He, by the way, cancelled both his annual press conference and his annual address, his annual State of the Union speech in 2022. And the State of the Union speech is a constitutional obligation. Not that Putin cares too much about the constitution, but it says a lot about his state of mind in 2022. And people like Prigozhin, who had direct contacts with him, were reaching out to him and telling, your generals are lying. We don't have enough manpower, we don't have enough munition, we don't have anything. The tasks that you are giving, like to go and conquer Kiev, are not realistic. Thanks God. And Putin was listening to them. Now they are all removed, killed or arrested or otherwise disposed. Which brings him back exactly in the situation he was 2 years ago, and we can hear it from his last speeches. It's very interesting. Putin is an experienced politician. He knows what to do during the election campaign. His answer actually is very simple. The secret is very simple, just to give away money. If we recall Putin's 2012 electoral campaign, that was when he introduced the maternity capital, like huge lump payments, which a mother is entitled to if she has a second child. Then there was a subsidized mortgage. And then there were the so-called May orders, the orders to increase doctors' salary to at least 200% of the average salary in the respective regions. And the teacher's salary should be not less than 150% of the average salary in the region. So Putin's 2012 electoral campaign was all about money and quality of life and nothing else. The main achievement, so to say, of his term was the annexation of Crimea, which led to sanctions, which led to dramatic consequences for Russian economy, for Russian international image. Russia was expelled from G8, etc., etc. But he didn't promise. I mean, imagine Putin running for election in 2012 and saying, well, what we'll do is that you will never be able to buy Parmesan cheese, and you will never be able to buy oysters anymore because they are all important, and that, well, the inflation will be 20% a year. I mean, no politician does like this, and Putin didn't as well. He was only talking about, increased salaries and pensions and social benefits. The same thing in 2018. Putin was running with a purely economic program. No bullshit about rebuilding the glory of the Soviet Empire. No word about the war. No word about the West. He was not complaining about the evil NATO and the US. in his 2018 presidential campaign, he was promising better life. Subsidized mortgage for IT specialists, maternity capital for the first child, not only for the second, increase of pensions of the increase of pensions faster than inflation rate, and few other things. Just go Google and read Putin's electoral program, Putin's campaign materials of 2018. Once again, the most important achievement, so to say, of his term was, of course, a war of aggression against Ukraine. But he didn't promise it. He never mentioned it running for election in 2018, because he knew what people want to hear from him, and he knew what's actually interesting for them. But not this time. If you watch Russian television, if you listen to Putin, it's an obsession. He only talks about Ukraine, about denazification and demilitarization, about achieving the goals of special military operation, whatever they are. And like in terms of like political technology, in terms of how you run campaign, it's very wrong. Of course, Putin doesn't have to care about the votes, about the actual outcome. As we discussed, the Electoral Commission will produce any desired outcome. But in terms of staying connected to the voters, to the constituencies, in terms of like being actually supported, he's doing a very bad things. Polls show that vast majority of Russians think that the war is the #1 problem, and that the president-elect, whoever it would be, has to make ending the war his top and first priority. According to a poll that we made in December, 65% would be happy if the war would end next week, no matter how. So no matter how the borders would look like, even if it like don't keep Crimea or like Donbass, they don't care. They just want it to stop. And then the second priority is poverty, like enormous poverty, enormous inflation, just like so many people are unable to survive. And then the third place, healthcare, because the healthcare system is entirely ruined, mostly because of the sanctions, because, well, Russia doesn't produce ultrasounds or MRIs. They only produce tanks and rockets. So my point is that in the past, Putin lied, of course, during the re-election campaigns, but he pretended to act as a politician who listens and tries to cater to people's needs. Not anymore. He doesn't even pretend, because he lives in a like very different reality. He like lost contact to the actual reality, and in his reality, the war is almost over. That the Ukrainian army is destroyed, and the victory will come very soon. And he pushes for the victory, and his main political agenda now before the election, which he repeats in every speech, is that we have to do everything possible to reach the victory. And that's because he doesn't hear any voices which would be able to give him feedback about the actual situation, which will lead, I believe, to the repetition of what happened exactly 2 years ago. Over-optimistic planning, orders that can be completed, and the generals complying with non-executable orders because all other generals are already fired or arrested, which could actually lead to a huge catastrophe, but huge military catastrophe. But even if it wouldn't, this lack of understanding of actual situation and our optimistic playing will, of course, play a very bad joke with Putin politically, because he is now like enormously disconnected from the people, from the constituents. And the election will be over, the official results will be announced, and people will be like, what was it? Like, what do we get? We wanted to vote for a guy who could help us with our living costs, with our utility bills, with our pensions, and the guy is talking and talking and talking about divorce that we don't need. This disconnection between like political leadership, political elite, and the needs of people is a dangerous thing. Well, for Putin, thankfully, it leads to like, well, exhaustion, and it leads to a change of the sentiment of the political mood in the society. We've already talked about First World War. It started in 1914 with the emotion, kill them all. Like for the Tsar, for the fatherland, for the God, go kill them all. Everyone was so patriotic on all sides of the front lines, not only in Russia and in Germany and in Austria-Hungary, in all those empires, everyone was sure that the war is the right thing and the victory will come soon. Army is part of the society. The soldiers are someone's brothers and sons and husbands. The society was like very supportive of them, like really pushing them to go to fight. By 1917, as you know, the situation dramatically changed. Those letters that soldiers were receiving from home were saying, go home, we need you, we miss you, it's not your war, it's not where you belong to. Like the war between like Russia and Germany on the Eastern Front actually ended because they just did stop fighting. There was like a global like decay. The socialists, the communist agitators right on the front lines, telling the soldiers that they didn't have like the Russian workers shouldn't shoot in a German workers because they are all brothers and their common enemies are their emperors. So change the like mood of the society in just like 3 years, while the emperors were still very sure of the patriotic and loyal feelings of their subjects. I believe that 2024, the third year of the war, is about to bring the same change in the Russian society. We don't see it in street protests because people are well aware about repression. We don't see it in like media because media are censored, but we see it in like local protests, in grassroots movements. We see it in polls. We see it, by the way, in the number of criminal cases against those who leave the military service, who don't want to stay like on the front line. 6,000 those cases in 2023 alone, which are actually top of the iceberg, because every mid-level officer, like the chief of a battalion or a company, is severely punished if someone deserts from his like battalion. So they prefer to cover up for these cases, to say someone is just like missing, or to arrest them in some makeshift prisons, but not in official prisons, somewhere near the front line, or even to kill them. So if we see 6,000 cases in military courts, it means that the actual amount of cases was maybe 20,000 or 50,000, something like this, dramatically more. So I think this will be the change, like achievable in 2024. If we talk about like structural factors that would like drive political process in Russia. Putinism is dying. It will not survive after Putin because it's a very like elitist and personal system of rule. Putin doesn't have a successor, and once again, it's not a bug, it's a feature. He can't appoint a successor because the moment he appoints one, he will become a lame duck. Exactly what happened in Kazakhstan, for instance, because like all these like 20 or 30 lieutenants, like members of the elite, will then try to improve their positions dealing with Putin's successor, not with himself. The system is running only when they need Putin as a supreme arbiter for their decisions. And that's why I believe it will be a very tough year for him. This will unfortunately not bring Alexei Navalny back to life. This will not back to life all the victims of this terrible war. For us, the motivation to keep working is actually to see how this golden colossus of Putinism very suddenly, like it was 30 years ago with the fall of the Soviet Union, turns out to be entirely, completely rotten and falls apart very quickly. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that amazing insight. Has anyone got any questions to begin with? Oh, yeah, of course, anyone else who has a question, feel free to come forward and wait kind of in this area to make it a bit more simple. Yeah. You just want to stand kind of right here and you can see.
So the microphone is there.
Yeah, there you go. That's amazing.
Huh?
You just want to
Can you hear me, Mr. Volkov?
Yes, I can.
So I do hope you're right, at least about change, but I'd offer a challenge to you. I think that the war has reached a position where probably it's not going to change significantly over any period of time in the near future. It's a war of attrition, as you said. It's not moving in one direction or the other. Putin can make the argument because he's annexed these territories, the territories of the Donbass and Crimea, that we're protecting our territory. We can stay there. The war could end tomorrow and he would still be able to claim victory on the basis of that argument and say it's a weakened Ukraine. He's salaries for people who are part of the military industrial complex have gone, some factories, from 24,000 rubles to 100,000 rubles a month. New recruits are getting 200,000 rubles a month. That means that inflation is going to skyrocket even more than it already has over the next 6 months, but not in the near future. In the near future, people in provincial cities are going to and living very well. The mid-level of his elite are very well connected. They're able to increase their influence and growing, as far as we can tell. He's been able to replace a lot of the lost income from their commodities exports through gray and black markets and through exports to countries that don't have the sanctions. So I don't see that he really is that weak. I think he's been able to hold out And I think he may be able to hold out a lot longer. How much he can run this economy as he is for that without having some sort of a collapse. That's probably the question, but that may not be for another 6 months or a year, especially since commodities prices are still holding high and they look like they will hold high. So I'd like you to respond to see what you think about those figures and that picture. And then if you could please, now that the focus of the opposition, open opposition, is only abroad, and I've been part of organizing events where the opposition speaks, and we see people going mostly catfighting one against the other, and not able to make up a unified front, not able to good front for the opposition. We left Russia a year ago. My wife was back just a couple of days ago, and it's a different country now. It's a different country than it was when the war started. I don't know if people are really that interested in their personal well-being as a kind of a political goal. I think the country's on a war footing. It's grim. It's a different place now. And so I don't think you need to run an election like you once did. Because I think people it's changed. It's a different place. It's a war country now. So I'd like you to respond to that, also to say, what's the future of the opposition for making up an alternative, or an alternative program, an alternative, a new constitution. So those questions, responding to my objections to you, and then where's the opposition going now? Thank you.
Wow, these are many questions, and I can easily take like another hour, maybe, replying to them. Try to keep it short. First of all, economy. Putin loves to make this argument that despite the sanctions and the pressure, the economy has grown by 3% in 2023, which is true. But that's the problem. Exactly as you indicated, those in the military industry and those who were drafted, their income increased manifold. But they are not Russia. Russia was the pre-war Russia was a post-industrial Eastern European country. Much more people worked in the beauty industry than in the military industry, in travel industry, in food, in hotels and restaurants. Like big Russian cities were not like big Soviet cities. There was not like, huge military factories all around, but fancy bars, theaters, and modern art galleries, and whatever. About 2 million Russians work in the military production industry. Well, maybe 6 or 7 with their families. 700,000 people were drafted or like went to war. So maybe 2 or 3 million more if we count the members of their families. The total of maybe 10 million. These two sectors, production of military equipment, production of weapons, and production of cannon fodder, have grown enormously. Indeed, like people who were earning like 30,000 rubles a month, which is 300 euro, are now earning the enormous 200,000, which are 2,000 euros, like just for fighting in a war. And that's it. 40% of the economy is now military production. So this 40% of the GDP explodes and burns immediately after it has been produced. It doesn't do any good to anyone. You can't eat the bombs and rockets. So if you calculate, that's what happens. If you have like 10% of the country whose living standards have like risen like 5 times or 7 times, and then you have 90% of the country for whom like their GDP their living standards like decreased by 30%, the average could be a 3% increase, like in average for the total of economy. But for those 90%, it doesn't really help. Their life is now much worse than it was before the war, and that's a very important impact. Having said that, I'm not telling you that like Putin will not survive 2024. I wish he wouldn't, but of course he still has a lot of resources. They still can produce a lot of cannons and a lot of cannon fodder. Russia still like outnumbers Ukraine enormously. It's a much larger country. And indeed they can just like draft more people, and they will probably do it after the election. It's a war of attrition. It's a war between political systems, and like Russia runs a totalitarian military mobilization, like rebuild of its economy, which can be efficient in the short term, and it is efficient now, but in long term, of course, this system lacks flexibility, ability to respond to changing circumstances. Democracies wins wars not because they are more flexible, because they are like healthier political like economic systems. Now, Ukraine is not perfect, of course. There are huge problems there and political problems and corruption and so on, but it still is supported by Western economies who are combined approximately 50 times larger or 40 times larger than the Russian economy. In the long run, it will, of course, play its role. And in the long run, this change of the mood of Russian society, which I was talking about, will make it for Putin impossible to keep on fighting, to continue this war. Like the first wave of mobilization in September 2022 was actually like a political nightmare. Like they were able to draft 300,000 people, but 1.2 million people then escaped the country, going to Georgia, to Kazakhstan, to Armenia, to other places. And these were young, bright minds. This was an enormous brain drain, like software engineers, designers, managers, people like digital nomads, people who speak foreign languages, people who had some spare money, who actually were able to make this decision just to flee, to leave the country. And that was the reason why they didn't call for a second wave of mobilization, which they actually need to, because they are suffering heavy losses. And they are not doing it because they are not aware about the political consequences, like how many more people will flee and how many people will resist a forced mobilization and what consequences it will have. And it has something to do, the ability of the regime to run a wave of conscription has a lot to do with the political sentiment in the society, if it's actually supportive of what the government is doing or not. That's why, even though we don't have real elections, it's important to work with voters to change their minds, to change the way they think. Now, there was a question about economy, voters, and
The second
the opposition. We are focusing on Russia, and we always did. So we don't consider ourselves an immigrant organization. When the war has started, we had about like 6 million followers on social media in Russia. And that was our audience. Now our monthly audience is about 18 million unique viewers, readers, and listeners from Russia. Which is a valuable asset and which is also a huge responsibility. Like to talk to them, to support them, to work with them, and that's what we are doing during all these 2 years. We don't think that the lack of unity in the Russian opposition is a problem. We don't need a united front. We already have united Russia. Thanks a lot. That's enough. It's good that there are different forces, different voices, different opinions in the Russian opposition because they work with different audiences, appeal to different parts of the society, talk to different parts of the society in their different language. Some groups are more focused on the diaspora, on the immigrants. Some groups are more focused on what's going inside Russia. And that's entirely okay. We don't need a unification for the sake of unification. It doesn't, well, of course, we can create a huge round table with a protocol and spend many hours doing it. I don't understand how it will make Putin suffer. The things that makes Putin suffer are concrete political projects, concrete initiatives. So we need not unions, not memorandums. We need ad hoc coalitions for every particular project, and we are very able to build them. Right now, there is a strategy for the upcoming so-called election, and all opposition groups, without any, I don't know about any counterexample for this, are calling for exactly the same. We all call voters, no matter what their views, no matter whom they support of the different opposition groups, to come to their polling places on polling stations on March 17th at noon, no matter what they do. If they want to make the ballot void, or if they want to vote for one of the fake candidates pretending to be Putin's opponent, that's not important because actually there will be no real vote count, but it's important for people to see each other, to reconnect, to realize they are not a marginal minority as the state media, state propaganda media presents them, but that they actually exist all over the country. And we did not need any like formal united opposition organization with a central like apparatus and politburo to agree upon this, and that's okay.
Okay, great. We have a question as well. It doesn't probably have to be our last question. If you want to come forward, I'll be very quick. If you just want to, you can kind of just, it's on the camera, so you can just see yourself. There you go.
Hello. I know it's off the record. I'm a journalist from Bloomberg News, but of course I know it's off the record. Just a quick question, because obviously everyone probably wants to know the same. Do you think that Mrs. Navalny will return to Russia? Of course, if you think. I think you already talked about the opposition. I had a very similar question.
But sorry, what's your name?
Helena Bedwell.
So Helena, what you're doing is disgusting.
Sorry?
What you are doing is disgusting.
Why? What happened?